Jasper waited for me to respond, one hip leaning lightly against the door frame, his posture easy like he belonged in this cramped hospital room. The white line of text still hung steady above him. Financial ruin within 2 years, glowing soft enough that I wondered if I could squint it away. I pressed my palm harder into the thin mattress, trying to ground myself in the dull throb of my fractured ribcage. Clara didn't need to send anyone, I said, keeping my voice flat. My throat still felt raw from the breathing tube they'd used when I first arrived. We signed the papers this morning. There's nothing left she needs to discuss with me. His smile didn't reach his eyes. He pushed off the frame and took one slow step closer, stopping far enough to avoid crossing into my personal space, but near enough that I caught the faint scent of cedar cologne. Look, I get things are messy right now. Neither of us wants conflict. Clara just felt guilty when she heard about the crash. She wanted to make sure you had someone checking in. Guilt. The word landed heavy. I thought about the Instagram photo I'd seen an hour before, her grinning pressed against his shoulder, posted only hours after our divorce finalized. If guilt lingered in her chest, it didn't show on her feed. I glanced past Jasper toward the hallway, half expecting Maya or Dr. Reed to wander back in and interrupt the conversation. No one came. I appreciate the thought, but I'm fine. The doctors are keeping an eye on. I nodded toward the IV snaking into my forearm. I'll be released soon. Jasper lingered another, his gaze sweeping over the bandages wrapped around my arm, the monitor line snaking across the... He gave a quiet nod like he was filing away every small detail. All right. I'll pass the message along. If you need any... Clara has my... He paused. Then, almost as an after... We're moving some of her remaining boxes from the house this weekend. We didn't want to show up unannounced. My jaw tightened. The house I'd spent 6 years remodeling. Every wall, every bathroom tile I'd laid myself during weekends after long construction shifts. The settlement had agreed Clara could collect her leftover belongings within 2... I hadn't expected her to... I'll leave the front door unlocked for them. Careful not to let my anger bleed into my... Jasper tipped his head and stepped backward out into the way, pulling the door shut until only a narrow crack remained. The floating text vanished as he moved out of my life. Once the latch clicked fully closed, I sank deeper into the pillows and let out a slow shake. I needed proof this wasn't just the concussion warping. I pressed the call button on the side. A few minutes later, another appeared, a middle-aged woman named Helen in navy scrubs, carrying a paper cup of... As she crossed the room, words materialized above her. Harder, 54, retires early after a bad knee injury. I watched her set the cup down the tray, watched the text shift as she turned to check my vitals. I didn't mention the floating writing. Instead, I asked a Harmon, "Do you have any plans for retirement soon?" She laughed softly, adjusting the blood pressure cuff around her arm. Wish I could. My knee's been killing me these past few months. Doctor keeps saying I might have to scale back work earlier than I planned. Hopefully soon, though. A cold prickled my spine. Her answer matched exactly what I'd seen above her. This was hallucination. Real. After she left, I stared at the ceiling for a long while, sorting through what went. Couldn't turn it off. Every person I looked at came with a single snap of their future. One major event. Not every choice, not every small joy or hardship, just one defining marker. I thought about my breast cancer, Helen's knee injury forcing retirement, Jasper's impending... My phone tray. A text from Lindsay, my sister, asking if I needed her to bring clothes when visited tomorrow. I typed a short reply, then hesitated before opening it. I hadn't called her since signing the papers that morning. If I could overthink it, I hit dial. The line rang 3 times before she picked up. Her voice sounded distant, like I'd somewhere. "Elias, are you okay? Jasper said he stopped by to check on you." "I'm alive," I said bluntly. "I got your box's note. You're coming to the house Saturday with him?" There was on the other end. "Yeah. Most of my stuff is still in the guest bedroom. I didn't alone." Tone softened slightly. "I know this is weird. I didn't plan for any past." "Nothing's planned anymore," I replied. I wanted to ask what about Jasper's future, wanted to warn her. Words back. How could I explain I'd seen a prediction floating above his head? She'd think the crash. We all quickly after that. No warm goodbyes, conversation. I set the phone down and closed, trying to rest, but sleep wouldn't settle over me. My mind raced through every person I would I left the hospital, wondering what secrets hung unseen over every neighbor. Late that afternoon, the door creaked open again. I expected another nurse, or it was Clara. She stood just inside the room, wearing the same jacket from her social media photo, back loosely. My gaze locked onto her, White screamed above her forehead. 36. She loses ownership of the family. My breath caught. The house was the one thing I thought we'd settled in the divorce. According to our signed agreement, I kept the property, financing to buy out her share. I reread those terms 3 times before signing. How could she lose the house 18 months from now? Clara shuddered uncomfortably under my stare, unaware I'd just glimpsed of anticipated. Come talk to you in person, she said quietly. There are a few things about this need to go over again. The rubber grip of the courthouse door bit into my palm as I stepped out into Portland's gray afternoon rain. The divorce papers were folded tight inside my jacket pocket, the ink still sharp and final. 3 years of quiet distance, months of mediator meetings, endless back and forth over furniture and savings and who kept the old pickup truck, all sealed away in that stack of paper. I paused on the curb, pulling my hood up against the cold drizzle, and stared across the 4 lanes of traffic. My phone buzzed once in my pocket, a work reminder I didn't have the energy to answer. I lifted a hand to flag a rideshare, my vision blurred for half a second by rain on my glasses, and then everything exploded. Metal crunched. Tires shrieked across wet asphalt. Pain ripped through my hip and shoulder before the world went completely dark. When I surfaced again, the first thing I registered was the steady beep of monitors, the faint smell of antiseptic and stale coffee hanging in the air of a hospital room. My eyelids felt heavy, and my throat burned like I'd swallowed sand. I turned my head slowly, wincing at the pull of bandages along my forearm, and saw a young woman in navy scrubs adjusting the IV line taped to my hand. Floating just above her crown, soft white letters hung suspended in the air, clear as a text message on a screen. Maya Torres, to breast cancer diagnosis in 8 years. I blinked hard, certain the blow to my head had conjured some strange hallucination. The words did not fit. They hovered there, steady, until she stepped back to grab a chart from the foot of the bed, and the text moved with her, locked above her. I swallowed thickly, my voice rough when I spoke. Did you see something floating over you just now? Maya paused, her brow creasing with gentle concern. She set the clipboard down and checked my pupil response with a small floating? No. You hit your head pretty hard in the collision a lot. The doctor said traumatic brain injury can cause weird visual disturbances for the first day or 2. We're monitoring you. She gave my arm a light, reassuring squeeze before she turned and left the room. The second the door clicked shut behind her, I lifted my uninjured hand to rub at my temples. My phone rested on the rolling tray beside the hospital bed, plugged into a charger. I reached for it with shaking fingers, unlocking the screen with my code. The notifications put up. Missed calls from my sister, automated messages from my insurance writer, a photo alert from my thumb hovered over the screen before I tapped the. The first post loaded immediately, pinned at the top feed. Clara's profile stared at me. The photo had been uploaded only an hour earlier. She leaned into a man's side in front of a waterfront restaurant in town, wide, her hand resting on Jasper Cole, the caption casually, no further explanation. My tightened, a dull ache mixing with the pain from my bruised ribs. We had only signed the final divorce that morning, barely 4 hours. I stared at the screen a minute, replayed. Every night we sat silent across from each other at table. Every promise we'd. I set the phone face down on the tray and leaned my head back against the stiff hospital pillow. I told myself the floating text above Maya's head was nothing more than a concussion effect, something that would clear up once the swelling in my brain. But doubt settled my stomach. What if it was real? What else might I see hanging above other people? A soft knock echoed against the doorframe. I opened my eyes, expecting Maya or the attending physician returning. Instead, a man stepped into the room, broad-shouldered, dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and dark jeans, his hair neatly styled despite rain outside. He paused just the doorway, and instantly, the faint white script material of him. Jasper Colby. Financial ruins. My throat. He was Clara's new boyfriend from the photograph. He'd come to the hospital looking for me. Jasper lifted one hand in a casual wave, fresh and neutral, but there was a sharp, assessing glint in his eye. Elias. I hope you're feeling all right after the accident. I came because Clara was worried about you. She didn't want to stop by herself and dribble. I said nothing. I kept staring at the hanging above his head, praying what they meant, what this ability might let me do. All the hurt of the failed marriage, the shock of seeing Clara's social media post only minutes earlier, tempted me. The door remained ajar behind him, and somewhere down the hallway, a nurse cautioned. Jasper shifted his weight for my reply, unaware I'd just read a piece of his future that. The quiet of the hospital room stretched on, and I understood in that moment that nothing in my life would ever go back to normal again. Whatever had happened when the car struck me had ripped open a door I could not close. The hum of the heart monitor softened into background noise as I studied Clara across the narrow hospital room. The words hung steadily above her, unchanging, and I fought to keep my expression neutral. 18 months. We'd signed the papers that morning, the language clear. I refinance the mortgage, pay her buyout, the house stays mine. There should have been no path for her to lose ownership of it, unless she planned to find one. What parts of the settlement do you want to revisit? I asked, leaning back against the pillows. My ribs ached with every small movement, a constant physical reminder of how fragile everything had become. Clara tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and stepped further into the room, pulling a folded sheet of paper from the pocket of her jacket. She set it down on the rolling tray beside my phone, careful not to knock over the cup of water Helen had left earlier. It's about the buyout timeline. The refinance is supposed to wrap up in 60 days, but my savings are tighter than I expected. I was hoping we could adjust the payment schedule, stretch it out over a year instead of one lump transfer once the loan closes. I stared at the paper without touching it. A longer payment window would mean interest, messy addendums, more paperwork to sign. It would keep us tangled together long after the divorce was supposed to cut the cord. And if the floating text above her head was this change might be the first step toward losing the house entirely. The mediator signed off on the original terms. I said, we both agreed to the lump payment. I don't understand why this is coming up now. The same day everything gets finalized. Her shoulders lifted in a quiet shrug, defensive before I'd even pushed. Life shifts fast, Elias. You know that better than anyone. My hours at the dental clinic got cut back last month, and rent for the apartment I'm looking at is higher than I budgeted for. I'm not asking to change the total amount, just how quickly it lands in my... I thought about Jasper's murder. Financial ruin within 2 years. Maybe Clara was trying to free up cash to prop him up. Maybe she'd already promised him something she couldn't deliver. Either way, agreeing to stretch the payments would leave the door open for future fights over money, for loopholes neither of us had considered when we first drafted the... I need time to look over, I told her. My sister Lindsay works at a family firm. I want her to review any revisions before I sign. Clara's jaw tightened. She hadn't liked Lindsay during age. Hated how my sister always pushed me to stand my ground instead of compromising to keep... Of course. I didn't expect you to decide right away. Just keep an... Paused, glancing toward the hospital door like she was worried Jasper would walk in before she finished speaking. I'll text you the full night. We can talk again once. She didn't stay long after that. There was no gentle goodbye, no quiet wish for my recovery. She grabbed her bag and stepped out in the hallway, and the second the door clicked shut, the weight of her request settled heavy in my chest. I reached for my phone and called Lynn immediately. She picked up a second ring. Her voice, "Are you all right? I got your text earlier, but I've been swamped with court filings all afternoon. I'm leaving the office now. I can swing by the hospital with an hour. I'm physically okay, mostly. I need you to read over a proposed change to the divorce settlement. Clara wants to adjust the buyout rule." Lindsay went for a beat. That's unusual. Judges don't love post-final modifications unless there's a major unforeseen hardship. Did she give proof income changed? She said hours were cut. She sent a draft she wants. Hesitated, biting back the part about the floating text above Clara and Jasper's heads. I couldn't tell her about the not yet. Not without sounding like I'd lost my mind from the crash. I just don't want to sign something that leaves a crack for... I'll bring my laptop in line. Don't agree to anything verbal. 40 minutes later, Lindsay arrived carrying a paper bag with soup and a sandwich, her work bag slung over one shoulder. She pulled a chair up beside the bed and set her computer on the tray, already logging into her firm's secure document system. We talked through the original while I ate, going over the mortgage finance timeline, the division of retirement funds, the furniture. When Clara's draft landed in that evening, Lynn immediately. She scanned page after page, her expression growing more focused as she added a clause, Lindsay said at last, tapped one line on the screen. If you miss any scheduled payment, she can file a petition to against the house. It's not standard for this kind of buyout agreement. Most lump sum modification at trigger. My stomach dropped. That was the crack. If I stretched the payments, one missed transfer, even by a few days, put the property at risk. The house built with my own hands, the only big I'd ever owned outright, jeopardy. It lined up perfectly with what I'd seen in Clara's head. She loses ownership of the family house. Signing this version, I said firmly. Lindsay closed up and leaned forward. Sharp. Good. We can send a formal response directing the modification, and if she pushes it, we can have our attorney write a counteroffer without that lien clause. But be prepared. Later that night, after Lindsay left, I lay awake in the hospital bed, listening to distant from the corridor. My mind turned to Saturday, when Clara and Jasper planned to come over boxes. I'd be home to supervise, to make sure nothing disappeared from the house while they were there. I thought about locking every closet, checking every drawer, protecting what was mine. A new thought settled in. If Jasper was heard financial ruin soon, would he be willing to take from Clara, from me, to avoid it? The visions weren't just warnings. They were clues about what everyone around pressure mounted. My phone buzzed with a new text from an unknown number. I opened it slowly. "We'll see you Saturday morning. Don't make this difficult." No name attached. But I knew exactly who sent it. The line in the sand had been drawn. I was no longer just waiting for whatever came next. I was going to defend myself first. I closed the front door after the deputy left and set the legal envelope flat on the kitchen table, staring at the county court seal printed across the front. My hip ached as I pulled out a chair and sat, the dull, persistent throb a constant reminder of everything that had unraveled since that rainy afternoon outside the courthouse. I didn't tear it open right away. Instead, I pulled my phone out and called Lindsay. She answered on the third ring, background noise faint, like she was sitting in a quiet conference room at the office. "I saw your text." They moved faster than I anticipated. "Don't open it yet. Bring the whole packet over tomorrow morning, and I'll walk through every paragraph before we loop in our own attorney." "Did you expect them to file?" I asked, running a finger along the sealed edge of the envelope. I suspected it was possible, but most people wait a week or more before pulling in the courts. "Clara's pushing hard, and I think Jasper is pushing her." She paused, her tone softening. "How are you holding up?" "You've been quiet since they came for the boxes Saturday." I hesitated again. Part of me wanted to lay everything out, the floating words above every stranger's head, the futures I'd glimpsed for everyone involved. But I still couldn't shake the fear that she would write it off as post-concussion confusion. Instead, I kept my answer guarded, trying to stay focused. "I've been looking into Jasper's dealership online. A few old reviews mention issues with titles and paperwork." Lindsay hummed thoughtfully. "That's useful if we need to build context for his financial situation, but it won't carry much weight in a divorce modification here. The judge cares about Clara's claimed hardship, not her new partner's business history." We wrapped the call shortly after, and I left the sealed envelope on the table while I heated soup for dinner. As I pulled up public business records for Jasper's dealer, Cole Auto Sales. The business had changed registered agents twice in 3 years, and there were 2 small civil claims filed against the company for breach of contract. Nothing massive, nothing that screamed imminent collapse, but enough to make the future marker above his head feel less like a random wing, and more like the end of a long trail of bad choices. The next, I drove slowly to Lindsay's office, careful to avoid sudden stops that jarred my healing. Her firm occupied a small suite on the second floor of a brick office building in downtown. I carried the sealed envelope into her works, and we spread the documents across her conference table once she had a free. As Lindsay read through the filing line, her expression shifted from focused. She submitted bank statements showing reduced hours at the desk. She tapped a highlighted section of one document. Her checking account has regular deposits from a second source that she hasn't explained anywhere in her hard drive. Small, consistent transfers, every 2 weeks, dating back almost 6 months. That was before we even started. My pulse picked up. 6 ago, Clara and I were still living under the roof, still pretending we might fidge. If she had regular outside income she never disclosed to me or the mediator, that changed everything. Hidden income could mean she didn't actually face the financial hardship she claimed. It could mean the request to stretch the buyout payments was never about covering. Could that be related to Jasper? I asked. Possibly, we don't know yet. It might be side work, it might be something else entirely. Our attorney can submit a formal request for full financial discovery if we decide to push it. But Lindsay leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. If there are undisclosed assets or income from during the marriage, the original settlement could be subject to revisions. I thought back to Clara. She loses ownership of the family home within months. If she'd concealed income marriage, what else she kept from me? That afternoon, I stopped by the local library to pull more public records while Lindsay emailed our attorney to schedule. I sat at a wooden table with my laptop open, scrolling through county lien filings and business registrations, and ran a search for any property Clara had acquired. Nothing popped her legal name. I expanded the search to include Jasper. Found it. A pending judgment against Jasper from a private lender. Fire. The amount was substantial, tens of thousands of dollars, tied to a business loan he'd taken out to restock used inventory. The filing stated he had missed 3 consecutive payments. This was the first concrete piece of evidence I'd found to back up the future line's head. Financial ruin within 2 years was not some possibility. Ready in motion. I packed up my laptop and headed for the parking lot, racing. Jasper was drowning in debt, and needed cash fast. If Clara could secure extended payments on the house buyout, he might be counting on her access to that money to settle his loan. But then another thought stopped me cold. What if Jasper planned to use Clara's name, her credit, her signature to take on more debt? If she's on the hook for his loans, that could explain why she would eventually lose the family home even after My phone buzzed from Lindsay. Our attorney wanted to meet in person the following day, and she would fight. Clara's legal team was arguing that denying the modified payment plan would leave her at risk of stability. That evening, I returned home and pulled up old bank records from the joint account Clara and I had separation. I scanned every transaction for the mysterious bi-weekly visits Lindsay had spotted, cross-referencing dates and amounts. Most of the transfers came from a limited liability company, registered unrecognized. I copied the company registration number to send first thing in the morning. Late that night, I paced the living room, going over every conversation I'd had with Clara and Jasper in the hospital. I'd assumed Jasper would target my house directly, but the different picture. He was pulling Clara into his financial mess, using her as a buffer between him and his creditors. And Clara, whether out of affection, fear, or greed, was hiding the truth from me. I sat down on the couch and pulled up a news alert notification on my phone. A local business article mentioned Cole Auto Sales was planning a major inventory expansion within the year. The timeline didn't with the pending judgment, or the future Jasper's head. Something didn't fit. Before I could unpack the contradiction, my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown local name. I answered cautiously. It's Clara. Her voice was tight, strained. She was trying not to raise her voice. We need to talk before your meeting with the attorney tomorrow. Alone. No lawyers. I paused, glancing toward the street outside. To discuss privately. Anything you want, legal teams. She exhaled on the other end of the line. You don't understand what's at stake here. Jasper isn't who you think he is. If you keep pushing this in court, you're going to say neither of us can stop. The line went before she hung up. I lowered the phone to my lip, replaying her warning. The future I'd seen above Jasper's head was only half the story, and not to dig deeper. Whatever Jasper was tangled up in unpaid business loans. The real danger was still hidden, waiting for me to uncover it. The doctor signed my discharge papers early Friday afternoon, clearing me to go home with strict orders to avoid heavy lifting and attend physical therapy 3 times a week. Lindsay arrived with her sedan to pick me up, and on the drive across Portland's rainy suburbs, we talked through how to respond formally to Clara's proposed settlement changes. She drafted an email from her laptop while we sat at a red light, a polite but firm refusal to accept the lien clause, and sent it before we pulled into my driveway. The house smelled stale, closed up for 3 days. I limped through the front door, my hips still sore from the collision, and flipped on the overhead lights one by one. Boxes lined the back wall of the guest bedroom, Clara's leftover clothes, old photo frames, kitchenware she hadn't hauled out before the divorce was final. I walked room to room, checking windows and locks, half expecting to find something already missing. Lindsay followed behind me, watching my movements carefully. You're on edge, she said, leaning against the kitchen counter as I ran a hand along the edge of the wooden dining table we'd built together years ago. This isn't just the crash stress, is it? You've been acting strange ever since you woke up in the hospital. I paused. I wanted to tell her everything. The floating white text above every person's head. The futures I'd seen for Maya, Helen, Jasper, and Clara. But how do you explain supernatural sight without sounding delirious? Lindsay worked with legal evidence, signed statements, provable facts. Visions wouldn't hold up in any courtroom. And she might start pushing me to schedule a neuropsych evaluation if I said a word. It's just a lot all at once, I said finally, turning away so she couldn't read my face. Divorce, the accident, Clara trying to rewrite the settlement last month. It's hard to relax. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't press further. She helped me carry a folding chair into the guest room and stack loose boxes neatly, so everything would be easy for Clara to collect the next morning. We agreed she would stay late that night, crash on the couch, to be present when Clara and Jasper arrived. Having a witness felt safe. The next morning dawned gray and I heard tires crunch on the gravel driveway just after 9. I stood by the front window and watched Clara's sedan pull in, Jasper in the passenger. When they stepped out of the car, I saw the familiar faint script above each of them. The predictions hadn't shifted over. I unlocked the front door and stepped back, letting them cross the threshold. Jasper's gaze swept quickly across the living room, measuring every surface, Clara kept her expression, but I noticed her glance toward the guest bedroom before saying, "Thanks for letting us get these boxes today," she said. "We won't long." Lindsay stepped out from the hallway to stand. "We stacked everything in the room. Feel free to check each box before loading them into the car. Elias and I would like to watch." Jasper's smile tightened at the edges. "No at all. We don't have any reason to." For the next hour, the four of us moved through the guest room in stiff silence. Clara folded sweaters and tucked them into moving bins, while Jasper hauled lighter boxes out. I kept a close eye on every item they handled, remembering the lien clause they'd tried to slip into settlement. At one point, Jasper paused beside the wall-mounted tool cabinet garage, the one I'd built to hold my power tools for construction. "This nice," he commented casually, running a finger along the wood frame. "Did the settlement say keeps this?" "It's mine," I immediately listed on the asset. Nodded, but I caught a flicker of calculation. I thought his marker, financial ruin in 2 years. He was scanning the house for anything valuable, anything he could argue to Clara, anything he could last. Once the last box was carried to the trunk, Clara turned entryway. "We got your email last night about the changes." Her voice stayed calm, but there's bite underneath. "I think you're unreasonable. I'm just asking." "The clause you added puts the house at risk. Are delayed." Lindsay cut in before I could reply. "That's not standard, and Elias has no obligation to it." Stepped forward, positioning himself Clara. "This feels like retaliation because of how fast together. You're punished." "That's not what this is about," I said. "This is about sticking to the agreement we both signed." Mediator. The comment there. Clara gave me one last sharp look before climbing the passenger seat, and Jasper hard. Their car pulled away from the driveway, and only once the taillights pushed around the corner did Lindsay. "That was tense," she said. "I don't think this from them." I agreed, but my mind was else. I'd watched Jasper study every valuable item in the house, and I'd assumed he planned to steal or dispute property cash. That was the obvious marker. But what if I was wrong? What if his financial collapse came from something entirely separate? Bad investments, unpaid loans, a failing business deal that had our house. I'd built my entire defense around one narrow assumption from a line of text. I'd only his future. That afternoon, after Lindsay headed home to catch up on work emails, I sat alone at the kitchen table and pulled up Jasper's IA profiles. No public posts about investments or debt, just photos of cars, restaurant dinners, trips to the coast. I found a profile for his used car dealership and read through customer reviews. Most were positive, but a few older reviews mentioned missing paperwork and delayed title transfers. A seat settled in my chest. My phone buzzed with a new text from Lindsay. She'd gotten it from Clara's attorney. They planned to file a motion with the court to review the modified payment schedule, viewing hardship. It wasn't fading. It was heading straight for the courthouse, and I realized I'd made a dangerous mistake. I'd filled in the gaps of Jasper's future, my own anger and fear, and I had no way to assumptions were right. Visions didn't give context, they only gave an ending. Knock sounded at my front door. I stood slowly, limping the entry, and pulled it open. A sheriff's deputy stood on my ported legal envelope. The white text above his head view as I met his eyes. Deputy 42. A routine trap was violent next winter. My took the envelope. I held it in knowing what was inside. The court filing had faster than Lindsay expected. Battle was officially formalized, and I still didn't know if I understood the true threat Jasper and Clara posed. The dial tone hummed in my ear after Clara hung up, leaving me staring at my phone in the dim glow of the living room lamp. Her warning lingered, heavy and vague. I wanted to call her back, demand she explain exactly what chain of events she was afraid I'd trigger, but I knew better. Any off-the-record conversation could be twisted against me in court. I set the device face down on the coffee table and dragged a hand over my face. My ribs ached, my hip throbbed, and exhaustion settled deep in my bones. The crash injuries weren't healing as quickly as I'd hoped, and the constant stress was slowing every part of my recovery. That night, sleep came in broken fragments. I kept waking, replaying the floating text above every person I'd met, wondering how many other hidden disasters waited just out of sight. The next morning, I drove to meet our family attorney, Mr. Hale, in his downtown office. Lindsay arrived 10 minutes after me, carrying a folder full of the public records I'd sent her the night before. We spread everything across the polished wooden conference table. Clara's unexplained bi-weekly deposit, the judgment against Jasper's dealership, the conflicting news article about planned inventory expansion. Mr. Hale adjusted his glasses and scanned each page slowly. Clara's undisclosed income is a strong point, but we need proof of where that money originated before we allege concealment to the judge. As for Jasper's debt, the court will only care about Clara's hardship claim, unless we can show she's borrowing or co-signing loans with. He leaned forward, tone firm. We can file a full financial discovery request, but that drags the case out longer, gives their side more time to prepare counter-argument. It's a gamble. I thought about Clara's phone call, her urgent plea for me to stop pushing. If Jasper was pressuring her to co-sign it, dragging everything into discovery might push him to act fast. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a notification. A new email from the clinic where Clara worked. It was a generic automated notice confirming a scheduled leave request for Clara, dated 3 months out. No context, no explanation, but it planted thought. Could her reduced hours be temporary or even intentional to support her hardship claim? We left the attorney's office mid-afternoon, agreeing to discuss whether to move forward with discovery by the end of the week. Lindsay and I walked to her car in the parking lot, gray rain starting to fall. You've seemed distant this whole... Stopping beside her, Dan. Ever since the hospital, you hold things. Are you sure this is only about the divorce and the crash? You won't talk to me like you... Her question lay hard. Right. I was keeping the biggest secret of all from her, the floating futures that guided every choice I... If I told her, she might arrange a neuropsychological evaluation, and any testimony I gave in court could be undermined by claims of traumatic brain injury and delusions. If I silent, the trust between us would... I'm just whelmed. The same hot answer. Too much happening at once. Lindsay's fell. She did once, quiet, disappointed, clear, and climbed into her car without... I watched her drive away, a sharp twist of guilt in my chest. This was the cry I'd feared. My refusal to be honest with my sister was chipping away at the only steady hour. By evening, I was alone. The quiet oppressive. I wandered into the guest bedroom, still half empty from his move-out, and ran my fingers along the wall. This room had held photos of our vacations, birthday gifts, the quiet life we'd planned before everything. Now it was just empty space. Marriage. I pulled out my phone and opened Clara's so again. Her post with Jasper was still pinned at the top. I scrolled backward through older entries, looking for clues about the LLC sending her regular payments. A photo from 6 months prior. Clara standing beside Jasper inside his dealership office, a stack of title paperwork spread over them. The caption only mentioned workday, but it confirmed she'd been spending time at the dealership long before our separation. A sharp knock pulled me away from the screen. I limped to the front door and peered out. A woman I didn't recognize stood on the porch holding a canvas tote bag. When I unlocked and opened the door, white text materialized above her head instantly, Elaine Vega. She prevents her grandson's serious spring. A surprise. This was the first marker I'd seen that wasn't a tragedy or loss. It was a choice, a future avoided. Elias Hale? She asked gently. I'm with the outpatient therapy team. I brought your first set of size handouts, since you weren't able to make your day. I decided to let her in. She handed me the packet, walking me through a few simple stretches from my hip. As she talked, I kept glancing at the word crown. It wasn't doomed to loss. She would stop happening. After Elaine left, I sat on the couch, everything. I'd spent weeks viewing this ability as a weapon, a way to defend myself against Clara and Jasper, to get revenge for the collapse crash. But the vision above Elaine proved the future disaster. This could change outcomes. This hit me like cold rain. What if I'd wasted all my energy planning retaliation, when I'd use what I saw differently? I thought of Maya, the nurse from the ER, 8 years until her breast cancer diagnosis. Could I warn her? Help schedule earlier screenings? My phone rang, caller showing our attorney's office. I answered an update on paperwork. Intel's voice was strained. Elias, Clara's legal team just submitted a counterfiling. They're including a statement alleging you've been harassing Clara, intimidating her during the move-out, and making unsubstantiated threats. They're asking the judge for a temporary protective order. My blood ran cold. A protective order would from contacting Clara, could limit my ability to defend myself in the settlement dispute, and would leave a permanent mark on my record. Jasper and Clara weren't just payment terms anymore. Dangerous. I lowered the phone after we finished talking. Silent house. Lindsay was upset with me. Physical injury still lingered. The court battle was spiraling, and now I faced a protective order. I'd hit bottom. For a moment, I craved nothing more than to use every secret future I'd seen to destroy Jasper, and Clay ruined me. I remembered Elaine's marker, and she would prevent. Ability didn't have to be revenge, but right now, it turned hotter than restraint. I grabbed my jacket and headed out for a hood to clear my head. Rain soaked my shoulder, and I kept my gaze down, avoiding eye contact with every passing student to see more futures. Halfway down the block, an older man paused beside me to hold open a child chasing a dog. I glanced up for half a second, and the white text bloomed above him. I didn't read the whole line. I turned away fast. The glimpse was enough to remind me. Every person carried a future, some hopeful. And mine was still mine to choose. The morning sun filtered thin and gray through the kitchen window as Lindsay and I finalized the exhibit list for the upcoming court hearings. 2 separate dates loomed on the calendar, one for the temporary protective order, and a second for Clara's motion to modify the buyout terms. Mr. Hale had advised us to bundle as much supporting documentation as we could legally submit ahead of time, to avoid last-minute objections from their counsel. We organized printed copies of bank records, the judgment against Jasper's dealership, the anonymous threatening text messages, and the LLC ownership paperwork linking Clara's undisclosed deposits to Jasper's business circle. Every page went into labeled folders, ready to hand to the judge and opposing counsel. "One more thing I pulled last night," Lindsay said, sliding a county recording document across the table toward me. Jasper took out a second personal loan 3 months ago, secured against the title of his personal luxury truck. The payments are overdue. He's borrowing against everything he owns to keep the dealership afloat. I scanned the filing. It lined up perfectly with the future marker hanging above Jasper's head. He was stacking debt on top of debt, scrambling to plug holes in his failing business. If Clara managed to stretch out the house buyout payments, that steady stream of cash would be his lifeline. "He's desperate," I murmured. "That's why Clara pushed so hard to rewrite the settlement. Desperate people take bigger risks," Lindsay warned. "We need to lock the house doors every night, hold on to all physical evidence, and avoid one-on-one contact with either of them before court." That afternoon, I drove to my construction office to collect old project files that proved my income could cover the original lump sum buyout. I wanted to show the judge I had never intended to default on the payment, removing their main argument for the extended schedule. While I sorted paperwork in the empty office, my phone buzzed with a notification from the county court pool. Their legal team had filed a supplemental exhibit pack. I pulled up the document on my screen. Clara included written statements from 2 former coworkers, claiming I had grown controlling and hostile near the end of our marriage. It was a carefully curated narrative designed to paint me as vulnerable, to justify the protective order request. There was no concrete proof, just here, but it would still carry weight if the judge I forwarded the file immediately to Lindsay and Mr. We had to draft a rebuttal before the end of the business. By early evening, As I turned onto my feet, I noticed a familiar sedan parked at the far end of the block. Jasper sat in the driver's seat, facing me. He didn't approach when I pulled into the driveway, just watched me step out of the truck. I kept my expression neutral, unlocked the front door, and once the door was locked behind me, I sent a photo of the parked car to Lindsay as another piece of evidence of certainty. The next 2 days passed in a blur of legal revisions and phone calls with. We finished the rebuttal to Clara's supplemental, submitted copies of my construction records, and prepared our witness. Lindsay would testify as a witness to the tense day, confirming I had not acted aggressively toward Clara. The night before the protective ordering, my phone lit up with an unexpected message. No threats, hands, only a just. "I want to meet at the house tomorrow afternoon, after the morning." "Just us. No Lindsay. There is something you need to know before you argue everything in." I forwarded the text to our attorney. Mr. Hale advised caution, warning it could be a trap to manufacture evidence against me. Still curiosity at me. What secret was back? Was she finally ready to admit she'd been pressured? After a long conversation with Lindsay, we agreed I could attend the meeting only if she waited in her car at the end of the driveway, within sight front porch. I would keep our conversation brief, record audio on my phone, and never let Jasper step foot. The following morning, the courtroom was formal. Both sides presented their argument to the judge. Clara's attorney described me as confrontational, referencing the co-worker statements and the tension during the box pickup. Our attorney countered with timestamps, the threatening messages for his circle, and proof that Jasper had initiated The judge delayed ruling on the protective order until after we heard the settlement mediation motion, ordering both parties to maintain no unnecessary contact in the meantime. It was not a win, but it kept the protective order from being court adjourned. I texted Clara to confirm afternoon meeting, with Lindsay already following behind neighborhood. I pulled in the driveway first. Clara's sedan arrived 10 minutes alone. Jasper was not with her. She stepped out, wearing a simple blouse and slacks, her face with exhaustion. When our eyes met, the white script appeared above her head, unchanged. Clara Bennett, 36. She loses ownership of the family. She walked up the front steps, stopping just outside the doorway and "They were agreeing to talk," she said quietly. "I didn't bring Jasper. Between you and me." I kept my hand near my pocket where my phone the conversation. "What do you need to tell me?" Clara hesitated, glancing down the street Lindsay's parked car. "Jasper didn't just borrow money for the dealership. He convinced me to co-sign a large loan 3 months ago. If he defaults, the creditors can come after my assets. My savings, my credit, anything I own, including any house buyout." Her voice cracked. "That's why he needed extended payments. I thought a slower payout would give me time to set aside cash before the loan comes due. I didn't know that he already was." I absorbed her words. This was what I'd been searching for. She wasn't trying to steal the house from me. She was trying to shield herself from Jasper's creditors, trapped by a sick months earlier. "Why didn't you say this during mediation?" I asked. "I was afraid. Jasper said if I told anyone, he would ruin my credit completely. I could fix it on my own." She paused, swallowing hard. "I don't fight to destroy both of us. But Jasper won't back down as you found the records." A low roll of an engine caught my attention. I glanced past Clara and saw her onto my street. He'd followed her. The balance of power had shifted weeks earlier, but Jasper was not to tell the full truth. The final was no longer avoidable. I turned back toward the house as rain dripped off the edge of my jacket, the chill seeping through the fabric and settling in my bruised hip. The walk hadn't quieted the storm in my head. The protective order filing hung over me, heavy and immediate. If the judge ruled in Clara's favor, I would be blocked from reaching out, barred from responding directly to their claims, forced to fight every battle from further behind. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and drafted a message to Lindsay, asking her to come over first thing in the morning. I needed her legal expertise more than ever, even if the space between us still ached. Before I hit send, I pulled up the business records again, reviewing the judgment against Jasper's dealership. The lender was moving toward garnishment of business accounts, and Jasper had already delayed responding to the court summons twice. The collapse I'd seen hanging above him wasn't some distant threat. It was accelerating. The next morning, Lindsay arrived earlier than I expected, carrying a stack of case law printouts and a paper cup of black coffee for me. She set everything down on the table without her usual easy smile, but there was no anger in her posture, only exhaustion. "I spoke with Mr. Hale last night. We have time to file a written response to the protective order petition before the hearing next week. Their whole argument hinges on witness statements and a vague timeline of intimidation. We can push back if we have proof of what actually happened when they collected their boxes." She paused, glancing at me carefully. "I also pulled the LLC records you sent her. The company receiving the bi-weekly deposits to Clara's account is registered under Jasper's business." I leaned forward, my focus sharpening. So the money came from Jasper's soul, routed through a separate entity to stay off the books during our divorce disclosure. It confirmed what I'd suspected. Clara had helped hide funds tied to Jasper's struggling business. "We can include that evidence in our response for the settlement modification hearing," Lindsay continued. "But we have to be careful. If we overreach, the judge might see it as retaliation for the protective order." I nodded, but my thoughts drifted elsewhere. To Maya, the ER nurse. 8 years until breast cancer. If I could find a way to warn her without sounding unhinged, she could start earlier, catch it sooner, maybe change that future entirely. That choice had nothing to do with Clara or... It was about using what I'd been given for... That afternoon, I drove back to Portland Mercy. I told myself I was only following up on my crash paperwork, a legitimate reason there. I checked in at the front desk and waited in the lobby, scanning the nurses moving between exam rooms until I spotted Maya in her navy. The white text floated above her head again. Maya noticed me after a few minutes and over. "I didn't expect to see you back so soon. Are you having new pain?" "Mostly follow-up paperwork," I said, keeping my tone calm. "I also wanted to thank you for taking care of me after... It's been a rough couple of weeks," she smiled softly. "Just my job. I hope everything settles." Hesitated, weighing my words carefully. I couldn't say I'd seen her future floating in the air. Instead, I framed it as a general piece of advice. I've been thinking a lot about preventative care lately, after everything that happened to me. If you haven't already, you might want to stick to regular breastfeeding schedules, even when you're young and feel healthy. Maya tilted slightly, surprised by the unsolicited tip, but I appreciate the thought. I'm due for a checkup soon. I'll make sure We talked for another minute before she was paid to a patient room. I walked away, wondering if my quiet warning would shift the future. There was no way immediately, but for the first time since waking hospital, the ability didn't worse. On the drive home, I made up my mind. I would not chase petty revenge against Clara. My goal was ability. I would present the undisclosed incomes to the court, defend myself against the false harassment claims, and hold the line on our original signed settlement. I wouldn't dig for extra dirt in their lives. Only when I walked through my front door, my phone buzzed with a new message number. This time it was longer. I know you've been digging into dealership records. Stop or you will regret it. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the screenshot to Lindsay and Mr. Hale as additional evidence of their aggressive pressure tactics. The message proved Jasper was what I looked up. That evening, Lindsay and I worked side by side at my kitchen table, assembling our formal response to the protective order petition. We listed every entry with timestamps, noted that Jasper had been the one to initiate at the hospital, and attached the anonymous threat received. Halfway through drafting, Lindsay pen. "You've changed," she said quietly. "A few weeks ago you wanted was to fight. Now you're focused only on defending yourself." Down. I glanced at her, and for a second I almost told her the futures. But still loomed too large. Instead, I gave her the simple answer I could. I realize fighting to destroy people doesn't fix what broke me. Fair. Lindsay studied my face, then nodded. The next day, Jasper pulled into my driveway while I was loading copies into my truck. He stepped out of his sedan, hands loose at his sides, but his jaw was tight. When our eyes met, the familiar above him again. "Financiers. You need to back off," Jasper said, keeping his voice low enough that neighbors wouldn't overhear. "Whatever you think you. It concerns me when eyes into my divorce settlement," applied evenly. "I'm only submitting evidence that was hidden during disclosure." "Nothing more." Jasper's gaze hardened. He realized I wouldn't be intimidated into dropping the case. Without another word, he climbed back in the way. I stood beside my truck, watching his tear around the corner. Jasper understood I held information that threatened his plans, and he would not passively for the court hearing, preparing a countermove. The balance of power was beginning to shift. It was far from finished. The tires of Jasper's sedan crunched across my gravel driveway as he pulled to a stop behind Clara's car. His door flew open before the engine fully died, and he crossed the yard in long, urgent strides, his jaw locked hard. Clara stiffened beside me, her shoulders hunching inward, and I saw the way she avoided meeting his eyes. Whatever fragile honesty she'd started to share was about to be snuffed out. "Clara, what are you doing?" Jasper's voice was low and sharp, pitched only for the three of us on the porch. "We agreed you wouldn't come here alone." I needed to tell him the truth, she replied, quiet but firm. "I can't keep covering for your loans anymore. Not after everything." Jasper's gaze snapped to me, cold and calculating. The white text hung steady above his crown. Financial ruin within 2 years. He knew his house of cards was close to collapsing, and Clara's confession threatened to bring it down faster. "There's no truth to spill," he said flatly. "This is a private matter between Clara and me. It doesn't belong in your divorce case. It belongs in court when she was forced to hide co-signed debt during our financial disclosure," I answered, keeping my posture relaxed but ready. My hand stayed near the phone in my pocket, still recording every word. Down at the end of the street, I could spot Lindsay's sedan, parked where she'd promised to watch. I wasn't without a witness. Jasper took one step forward, invading my space. "You're going to take that recording and bury it. Drop the extra evidence about the LLC and the loans. Otherwise, I'll make sure the judge sees you as a man hell-bent on destroying Clara's life out of spite." "I'm not here to destroy anyone," I said. "I just want the original settlement. If Clara is trapped by your debt, that's between the two of you, not..." Clara spoke up, turning toward Jasper. "I'm not going to lie anymore. If the court asks, I'll tell them I co-signed the loan under pressure. I'll explain why I pushed for extended buyout." Jasper's face darkened. For a heartbeat, I thought he might lash out. Instead, he released a bitter laugh and glanced between. You think this changes anything? Even if you tell the judge, the damage is already done. The lenders will come for whatever Clara owns once I default. The buyout money was supposed to be... He shifted weight, the fight draining slowly from frame. I didn't plan for it to spiral this far. I thought the dealership inventory flip would cover everything before the payment. The admission hung in the damp afternoon air. His scheme had used Clara's delayed buyout funds to keep his business afloat long enough to sell off vehicles and pay down. When I refused to modify settlement, the whole plan... A car horn sounded faintly. Jasper glanced over his shoulder toward the road, like he was weighing his... He could be threatening, try to grab Clara and leave or walk away before he said something that's... Fine, he said at last. What you want, but don't pretend this won't hurt Clara just as much. He didn't wait for a response. He turned, climbed back his sedan, and peeled out the driveway, leaving tire marks. The moment his car vanished in the corner, Clara exhaled a breath, like a weight had been torn. I was scared he'd force me to leave before I talking, she said. I've been walking on eggshells around for months. He kept saying if I pulled out, my credit would be... I understand the prayer. I heard her carefully. But this still changes meetings. Our attorney will need a formal statement from you if you... Actually, I'll do it. We stood on the porch a few minutes longer, sorting what came next. Clara agreed to contact Mr. Hale in the morning to provide a sworn statement about the co-signed loan engine. Once we finished our conversation, she got into her and drove off, leaving me. I pulled my phone from my pocket, the recording, then sent the full audio file to Lindsay and immediately. A few minutes later, Lindsay pulled up the driveway and walked over to church. I saw Jasper leave in a hurry. Everything all right? He asked. Clara confessed she co-signed a loan under pressure. We have it on tape, and she's willing. I paused, then said the words I'd been holding back for weeks. I think we finally have everything for the hearings. Lindsay listened slightly. That could completely shift the judge's view of motion. If she was hiding forced co-signature, her request to rewrite the settlement. We spent the rest of the afternoon going over how to submit the new evidence properly, following court rules for recorded conversations, protocols to follow, disclosures to file, lines to meet. We couldn't rush it, or risk the judge throwing... That night, I sat in the quiet house, thinking about all the futures I'd seen in people's heads. Jasper's financial collapse was still coming, but now it wouldn't drag my home down with it. Clara's marker had warned she would lose the 18 months, but that future was tied to Jasper's debt payment plan. The original settlement held, that path might close off entirely. The future wasn't set in stone completely. My phone the message from Maya, from the ER. Scheduled her breast screening. She wrote, thanks to the reminder weeks earlier. A small, quiet win, a court battle. The next morning, we filed the supplemental evidence packet with the county clerk, including notice of a recorded conversation and intent to call Clara as a witness. The final hearing date for both motions was only 3 days away. Every piece was in place. It's almost over. But as I closed my laptop and stood to stretch my sore hip, a flicker in my chest. Jasper had backed down on the porch, but desperate men often had one last play left. With all our evidence secured, I couldn't be certain he wouldn't try some stepped into the courtroom. The 3 days before the final hearings dragged slowly. I stuck close to home when I wasn't meeting Lindsay or Mr. Hale, locking every door each night, and saving all messages and recordings in encrypted cloud storage as backup. We filed the required notice of audio evidence with the court clerk, following every rule precisely to avoid having the recording suppressed. Clara kept her word and sent over a sworn written statement detailing how Jasper pressured her into co-signing the loan, confirming the conversation captured on my phone. I heard nothing from Jasper during that window. No texts, no surprise visits to the driveway, no surveillance sightings. The silence felt heavier than any threat, like a storm holding back before it broke. Still, we prepared for every argument their legal team might raise. Claims the recording was illegally obtained, attempts to paint Clara's statement as coerced by me, renewed allegations of harassment. The morning of the dual hearings arrived gray and damp, identical to the day I'd signed the divorce papers and been hit by the crash. Lindsay rode with me to the courthouse, and we sat quietly in the parking lot for a minute before heading inside. The courtroom smelled of old paper and polished wood, the judge's bench elevated at the front. Clara arrived shortly after we did, alone. Jasper was not with her. When the proceedings began, the judge first addressed the temporary protective order petition. Clara's attorney repeated the hearsay statements from her former co-workers, trying to frame me as hostile. Our attorney countered with timelines of every interaction, the anonymous threatening messages sent to my phone, and the testimony Lindsay was ready to give about the supervised box pick. Then we introduced the recorded porch conversation and Clara's sworn statement. The judge listened carefully to a redacted portion of the audio, focused on Jasper's admissions about the loans. After both sides finished arguing, the judge ruled there was insufficient credible evidence to approve the protected. The petition was dismissed. Next came Clara's motion to modify the buyout payments. Her attorney argued hardship, referencing her reduced clinic hours. Our attorney laid out the undisclosed bi-weekly deposits from Jasper's business, the pending judgment against the dealership, the co-sign loan, and Jasper's plan to use stretched buyout funds to rescue his failing. We showed proof I could cover the original lump payment with. Clara took the stand voluntarily. Under oath, she confirmed every detail in her statement, admitting she'd hidden the co-signed debt during financial disclosure out of fear of Jasper's retaliation. When the judge asked if she still believed she faced genuine housing instability without extended payments, I was trapped. I thought this was my way out, but I understand now the settlement we originally agreed to was fair to. The court recessed for 20 minutes while the judge reviewed all exhibits. When we returned, the rule was clear. The original divorce settlement remained fully enforceable. The request to rewrite the payment schedule. No line clause would be added to mortgage. The house stayed mine, under the terms we'd signed for. Clara did not fight the other. After the hearing adjourned, she found a way. I'm going to work with a credit counselor and negotiate with the lenders separately from Jasper, said softly. I'm cutting time for good. I'm sorry for everything. I hope it works out for you, I replied honestly. The anger that had burned in me for weeks was gone, replaced by quiet relief. I didn't punish her. She was already choosing to fix. We parted ways, and I never saw her again. Later, Lindsay told me Jasper's dealership entered default within months, and the business was liquidated to settle us. His future mark come to pass, but it no longer threatened my life. A week after the ruling, I returned to Portland Mercy Hospital for a final follow-up appointment about this. I crossed paths with Maya near the nurse's station. She spotted me. I got my screening results back. Everything looked clear, but catching it early if anything changes will make all the difference. Thank you for pushing me to put it off. I nodded, glad my quiet warning had landed. The ability to see glimpses of people's feelings wasn't a weapon. Responsibility. One I intend to wield carefully, only arm. Passed. My hip and ribs healed, physical therapy ended, and I completed the refinance on the house, sending the full buyout payment to Clara as the original agreement required. She used part of those funds to negotiate a settlement co-signed loan, saving her ruin. We rarely spoke, only exchanging brief formal confirmations through our attorneys until all. I stopped straining to avoid eye contact in the street. I learned to live with the floating lines of text that appeared whenever I looked at someone. Most days I kept the visions to myself. Once in a while, when I saw a preventable disaster in someone's future, I offered a gentle, piece of advice. Never how I knew. One quiet evening, I stood on my front porch, watching the sunset paint the Portland sky soft orange and pink. The house behind me was fully mine, every wall and tile I'd laid still standing. The court battle was over, the threat to my property gone. The fear that had hung over Clara, losing this within 18 months, came to pass. In the path. I thought back to that rainy day outside the courthouse, the papers, the crash, the moment I woke up in a hospital room and first saw Helen's head. Everything that followed had forced me to choose between vengeance and justice, fear and mercy. I'd chosen mercy. The floating didn't write the ending. We did.